Good evening, everyone. I'm Michael Bolden, the Dean here at the UC Berkeley School of Journalism. Welcome to Northgate Hall. Before we get underway, a member of my team has asked me to remind you to please turn off your cell phones so that we can be focused on the conversation that we're having here tonight. When I came up with the idea of this event back in November, I had no idea I was anticipating what would be happening on the world stage, that this event would be so attuned for this moment. I wish that wasn't the case. Press freedom, our ability to freely investigate and reveal facts, hold power to account, to do the work of journalism, no matter who you are or where you are in the world, is what we're talking about this evening. And it's what we need to keep talking about long after tonight. How do we defend and protect the journalists who are stifled, or threatened, or jailed, or killed for doing their jobs? Much is at stake for our nation and our world. A threat to one journalist is a threat to all of us and to the democratic way of life we revere. The people speaking with us tonight are on the front lines of this fight. I spent 14 years at the Washington Post, a formative time in my career as a journalist and a news leader. I worked with Emilio Garcia-Ruiz at the Post and at the San Francisco Chronicle, and I know firsthand about his courageous work in journalism. Sometimes I listened to him, often I did not. However, I admire him, and I admire the work he does every day to help journalism and journalists thrive. Emilio has been editor-in-chief of the San Francisco Chronicle since September 2020. He took on the challenge of leading one of our premier California newsrooms after 19 years at the Washington Post. His final role at the Post was as managing editor for digital, where he oversaw the development and execution of digital strategy, supervising more than 350 journalists. Thank you for leading this discussion tonight, Emilio.
I didn't have a choice.
Jason Rezaian is the Washington Post Director of Press Freedom Initiatives. In 2014, he was the Post Tehran bureau chief when he was imprisoned and persecuted in Iran for 544 days. From 2018 to 2024, he was an opinions columnist at the Post. HarperCollins published his memoir, Prisoner, in January 2019, and you've likely seen or heard Jason recently on CNN, MS Now, or NPR, where he's a regular contributor. Jason's story of perseverance is an inspiration to journalists everywhere. Jason, we're grateful that you are talking with us tonight. I just want to note, with at least 3 of us here with long-standing connections to the Washington Post, that despite everything that's happening there now, we must recognize the Post's intrepid history and the fearless reporting that journalists are still doing there today, despite the challenges they face. But spearheading this important work for press freedom is our final guest, Jodi Ginsburg, Chief Executive Officer of the Committee to Protect Journalists. Jodi was a correspondent for Reuters in Johannesburg, a chief correspondent for Reuters in Ireland, and then Reuters bureau chief for the UK and Ireland. Jodi is working to protect the rights and safety of journalists around the world through critical global campaigns at a time when they face great danger. Thank you, Jodi, for the work you do every day and for being here tonight. I also want to recognize and appreciate that the Honorable Nancy Pelosi and her husband Paul Pelosi are with us tonight. Thank you, Speaker, for being here. And for all you've done to protect journalists and press freedom, and for continuing to be a voice for the future of our democracy. Finally, thank you to the San Francisco Chronicle for your partnership in this event tonight. Thank you to our Zoom audience, and thanks to each of you for being here for a discussion that is central to our future as a nation at a time when press freedom, when all of our freedoms are in peril. Emilio, take it away.
Thank you, Michael. All right, it's not that difficult. We have one of the country's greatest experts on Iran sitting right here, so we're just going to start off with Jason. Tell us a little bit about what's happening on the ground in Iran right now.
Thank you, Michael, for hosting us tonight. Madam Speaker, for being here. You were a huge support in my case. My brother talks about meeting with you when I was locked up, and I always kind of blush when I think about the number of people in Washington, D.C. and here in the Bay Area that supported me, so thank you. And it's great to be here with Emilio and Jodi. Emilio was a colleague and a buddy for a long time. My wife works with Jodi as her special envoy at the Committee to Protect Journalists, and so it's good to be among friends. And thanks everybody for being here. The war in Iran. Look, I've spent the last 25 years trying to tell stories of the people of Iran in the hopes that this kind of war wouldn't happen, right? And I think my position on it is that it's a pretty unnecessary conflict that we've gotten ourselves into. Not that Iran doesn't pose a threat, it certainly does. It poses a threat to neighboring countries, and more than anything, to the people of Iran. And that's been the case for the last 47 years. But was it an existential threat to the United States of America or Israel? It's even silly to say that out loud, because its military was not up to the task of defending that country, as we've seen over the last two conflicts dating back to June of last year and right now. Their air defenses have been completely decimated, and yet the repressive apparatus of the state continues to wreak havoc inside the country, arresting Iranians, stifling their ability to express themselves. The country is now on day 32, I think, of an almost complete internet blackout. And the reports that we get from people on the ground, from friends and relatives, come in the form of phone calls. We can't call into Iran. They're able to call out. And I can tell you that it's an incredibly distressing situation. And yet there are a lot of people inside the country who are very hopeful that this campaign of bombing will continue because they are so desperate for a change inside the country. What they don't realize is there's not a developed plan or strategy or an idea of what might potentially come after the Islamic Republic. And I think those of us who followed the adventures in Iraq 23 years ago have a kind of clear picture of what could happen there. And I'm just very hopeful that Iran, a country that I love, despite the fact that my wife and I and our families were terrorized by that state, that it doesn't send into the kind of chaos that some of the other countries in the region have over the years. But I think the biggest issue right now, and I've been harping on this quite a bit in recent months, is that we have to figure out ways to get Iranian people back online so they can tell their story. In the absence of international journalists on the ground, there are almost none at this point. And those that are able to report from there are very limited in where they can go and what they can say. We have to rely on citizen journalists. And in an internet shutdown like the one that they're facing right now, it's almost impossible to get images out. And yet people figure out ways. And so it's a distressing situation, and one that I posed a question to a longtime Middle East diplomat just last week. That, do you think that our lack of diplomatic relations with Iran over the last 47 years has contributed to our kind of lack of understanding of that country? And I think that that's really at the heart of this. We have not had real windows into Iran for a very long time, and we don't have them right now.
So it's about the 10-year anniversary, right, of your release. If you read Jason's book, which I suggest you all do, I want to go back to something you said, which is one of the things about you that I admire so much. You love Iran, right? They held you hostage there. Your book remarkably. It actually is a very funny, very sort of kind of an intimate look at being in hell. And you managed to make it seem quite different. So all these years later, you still love Iran. You still, the passion you have for that country remains.
Probably more than ever. I think if you can't laugh at difficult situation, then the terrorists have already won.
Yeah, his book actually has jokes about his guards, which I didn't think that was a great idea for you.
It's what helped me get through the time, right? And I think that Iran is a country and a civilization, really, that has contributed so much to humanity. And I'm not saying this as a Iranophile. I'm looking out at a couple of Iranian friends in the room right now. I love the place. It's a special place. The architecture, the poetry, the filmmaking, the language, the history, the food, right? It's a unique part of human history that deserves to be preserved, and we will be better off for it. And I'll tell you, the Islamic Republic has existed for 47 years. I'm not a mathematician, but Iran has been around as an entity for over 2,500 years. That's not a lot of time, right? And I know that I'll live to see an Iran that is not called the Islamic Republic. I just hope that I live to see a free Iran. And I don't know that the thing that the United States of America and Israel are doing today is going to get us any closer to that.
So let's focus down into the journalism part of the conflict. And Jodi, Jason touched on this a little bit. The situation in covering this conflict is quite different than in other conflicts we have had, especially relating to the perils that journalists face.
Yes, so it's different, but it's also similar in many ways. So one of the big challenges, as Jason said, is almost no internet at all, which means getting information out is incredibly difficult, and no international access in. So journalists unable to go in. If you think about other conflicts, particularly ones that the US have been involved in, particularly where you've had boots on the ground, you've had journalists who've been able to embed and go in and do some reporting. Without that, what you end up with is a situation, A, where lies proliferate and misinformation and disinformation proliferates, because it's very difficult then to verify what's actually happened. If you think of the bombing of the school, and I know we're going to come on to visual verification later on, but if you think about the bombing of the school, all of that has to be done remotely because you can't get anybody in to do that verification. And nobody on the ground is able to report out, or to do so is incredibly dangerous. That's not, lack of access, of course, isn't totally unheard of. No international journalists have been able to get independent access into Gaza, for example, for the past 2.5 years. But increasingly, governments are recognizing that that is a mode in order to control the narrative. In order to be able to control the narrative in a world where we supposedly have access to all the information, you've got to shut down the internet and you've got to prevent people from getting in there, because otherwise they can see the things that you don't want them to see. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, in this war, we're seeing, again, one of the things that is quite common when you start to see wars that involve number of different countries is increased censorship across the region. So we're not just seeing censorship in Iran, which we would expect. We're seeing censorship in the UAE, in Qatar, in Israel, new legislation which bans people from reporting on certain kind of military coverage. We've seen arrests of journalists in places like Qatar for coverage. We've seen social media accounts closed. So it's not just Iran where this censorship is happening. We've seen it in India, for example. And of course, we've seen it here too. We've seen it here too in the way in which the US media has been threatened over its own coverage of this war. And I think that's really important to say, because we tend to think, oh, Iran, it's happening over there. Terrible Iran. Iran put Jason in jail. Iran is stifling its people. It absolutely is. But more and more we are seeing governments, including the US government, attempting to restrict what journalists can report on here in the United States as well.
And then also, add to that the lack of access, right? And blocking access and blocking our ability to even ask questions.
Well, so the Pentagon, and it started with the White House, obviously. It started with the White House press pool and banning the AP because they had the temerity to call it the Gulf of Mexico. Banning the White House, banning the AP from the White House, that has set a pattern which has certainly been followed at the Pentagon. And even though, when we were talking about this earlier, we've now had a judge say that the new rules on Pentagon access were unconstitutional, even the day after that ruling, we saw the Pentagon try to introduce new access limitation rules to stop people being talked at in the corridor, just in case, the corridor was where all of the secrets that are not being sent by Pete Hegseth on Signal to everyone are being shared.
And yet, a bomb hits a school in Iran. The official line is it was an Iranian bomb that somehow spun around and hit the school, and it took journalists around the world 18 hours to call that a lie. And so we now have more weapons than we've ever had before. And, the use of a lot of names for it, but visual forensics or video investigations now have really changed the game in war reporting. And I know, Jason, you're a big fan of that type of work.
A huge fan of that type of work. I think it's so important. And, those visual forensics, visual investigations that started 6-7 years ago, really in a big way, because so many countries have become harder and harder to get into, are very expensive and time consuming. They rely a lot on open source material that needs to be verified. But the good news is that those tools to verify open source video and imagery that exists out there are getting better and better, and cheaper and more accessible. And I see a young journalist I know from Iran who uses those kinds of tools to verify information coming out of Iran right now. And I think in the absence of being able to put journalists into country, we really need to rely on these things. But to your point, it's very frustrating when I hear from other Iranians in particular, or see them on social media posting these images or videos saying, hey, mainstream media, we're ahead of you on this. Well, not actually, right? Because there's so much fake video out there from this conflict, from the conflict in Gaza, from Ukraine, and anything else that happens in daily life. So this kind of verification is really necessary. And I think that it's very important to say, especially to journalism students right now, that our ability to do data-driven, verifiable, beautiful, kind of expansive journalism has never been better than it is right now. I worry that the impact of our work has lagged behind for a lot of different reasons, but in terms of the quality of journalism that's put out and our ability to prove things, I don't know that we've ever been able to do better.
But it's also the work, right? I mean, verification is the work. It's a new tool that we've got, but that is the work of journalism. That is our job. And if we can't get there, we can't see for ourselves, then we have to find other ways to do it, whether it's using satellite imagery or so on. That is our job. And one of the things I find really frustrating is, I think we got into this pattern where we thought that journalism was asking you your opinion and asking you your opinion and then printing both as if that was somehow telling us anything newsworthy. That's not our job. That's the job of a parrot or a stenographer. Our job is to determine, it's not for me to ask Jason whether it's raining. It's for me to go outside and determine that for myself and then tell other people that. And I think this is why, actually, I think you're seeing such a swing back towards people recognizing the value of journalism, because in the absence of our ability to go in and see what happened in that school. We have journalists doing the work of journalism to verify what happened. They're using new tools, as I say, but they're doing the job. We saw it in Minneapolis, right? The administration lied about what happened to the 2 protesters who were shot. It took journalists and other local activists to demonstrate that those narratives were false. That's the work of journalism, and that's why I think you're seeing a resurgence in particular of local journalism in the United States and elsewhere, because people recognize that the work is going in and that they know that those are individuals and organizations that they can trust because they're doing the work of establishing facts and doing verification.
So journalism has been in a pretty much a constant state of evolution since right around 1995 when the internet first came out. And our industry has had its successes and its really bad decision-making when it came to the arrival of digital. But for those of you who don't quite understand, there's a team of people at the Times, at the Wall Street Journal, at CNN, who, when something like the bombing of the school happens, their job is to get all the video around that incident. And that means scanning all the social media they can get. They collect all of that, and then they spend days trying to, actually hours, because they're very fast, trying to verify the metadata on the video to prove it's not fake and that it's actually from that event. Once you have that video collected, then you do reconstruct. You can almost reconstruct exactly what happened. And if you go back to the attack on the school, the key was that one of those videos showed a Tomahawk missile. And the only people shooting Tomahawk missiles are Americans.
And just as an aside, I understand from talking to Eric Stover of the Human Rights Center here that a lot of those protocols for how you do those investigations came from the Human Rights Center here at Berkeley. So, and the last point about that is the reason that's really also really important is because one of the things that war correspondents realized many years ago was that we were doing all this reporting on places like Bosnia and elsewhere, and you'd have photographic evidence, you'd have written evidence. Much of it, if not the majority, was not admissible in a court of law. So what's interesting, in addition, about a lot of the new mechanisms that are being used to do the documentation and the verification is they're being done in such a way that can then be used in a court of law subsequently. So when people feel like this journalism isn't making a difference, it's not making a change instantly. That may be true, but one of the things we talk about a lot with our teams and the journalists that we work with who are working in the most risky situations is it may not be making a difference now, but that information may make all the difference in years to come when there are court cases holding individuals accountable for war crimes and atrocities around the world.
And in particular on the press freedom case, I think a lot about the case of Shireen Abu Akleh, a Palestinian-American journalist for Al Jazeera who was killed in a, what would you even call that?
She was shot by an Israeli sniper in the gap between her press vest and her hat as she was reporting on a skirmish that was a very long way away. And no one's ever been held accountable.
Post and the Times and others have kind of proved that she was targeted and killed because she was a journalist specifically. And I think that accountability piece is a bridge that we haven't crossed yet, but there's a lot of evidence, and we'll get there.
So journalism has always had its level of danger, going back to people embedded with troops in World War II, right? This isn't something new. What is new is that we as a society now have gotten used to getting information from individuals, the influencer sort of mode of news. And that has led to a lot of independent journalists being in some of these situations. It is one thing to go to Ukraine as a journalist at the New York Times, where you literally have millions of dollars of security behind you as you're doing your job. And if were something to happen to you, they would get you out. You're an independent journalist and you are on your own, We know the dangers of this already. Austin Tice was a freelancer, right?
James Foley.
What was that?
Jim Foley.
Jim Foley, also a freelancer. But we're seeing more of it now. So how do we help those people who are trying to do this work and it's just so dangerous?
So I think one thing that it's really important to stress is that the vast majority of journalists who are listed as being killed in our killed list, and by the way, the last 2 years have been record highs or lows, depending on how you look at it, numbers of journalists killed worldwide. Last year, 129 journalists, media workers were killed. So we are in a completely anomalous situation. Yes, it's always been dangerous, but this is the most dangerous time in the world to be a journalist. And the vast majority of those journalists are actually not even necessarily freelancers coming in, which is how we tend to think about war reporting, right? We tend to think about the individuals flying out for the Post or whomever to a place. They're local journalists. You know, the highest number of journalists killed on our list last year were Gazan journalists killed by Israel in Gaza. Most of those people never chose to be war reporters. They are reporters reporting from a country to whom war has come. And the same is true of Ukraine. The Ukrainian journalists who are now war reporters, most of them were not war reporters. They don't necessarily have the training. You know, when I did my very, very brief stint at being a war reporter, which I hated, I went on a hostile environments course where they teach you what it's like to be kidnapped. An American journalist was kidnapped today in Baghdad. And my heart goes out to her and her family. I cannot think of anything more terrifying. But and there will be a lot of coverage of that because she's an American journalist in Baghdad, and the majority of journalists who are targeted are local journalists who don't, as you say, have any of those facilities. They don't have insurance. They don't necessarily have the personal protective equipment. They don't necessarily have the training. And so one of the things that we absolutely need to do, and we do a lot of this work and many other organizations do, is to try and make sure that people have at least the basic risk assessments done and understand what the risks are before they go in to cover these kinds of conflicts, which are much more dangerous. It used to be the case that having press as the label on your vest would kind of accord you some sort of safety. Now it's a target. It's a target.
In the United States as well, by the way.
And just to get on to the United States very briefly, again, when I started as a journalist, the only people that had hostile environment training were people that went to wars. Now, journalists in the United States are receiving some kind of hostile environment training in order to be able to cover protests, to be able to cover rallies. I mean, many of you will have seen those images from the Minneapolis protests where ICE was throwing people to the ground, kneeling on their backs. We know people who've had to, who are sort of saying, where do I get a face mask from? I mean, there were people covering the Minneapolis protests who were going to Home Depot to buy painter masks that they were then putting heat packs into because it was so cold. And you had to choose between either freezing or not being able to see quite properly, because obviously that would make it all fall. But none of them had been trained on how to use personal protective equipment safely, and none of them, very few American journalists have had to operate in that kind of environment. Last year we helped train 1,000 journalists in the United States. We didn't even work in the United States until 2016.
And we should also talk about our brethren to the south of us, where for decades now covering a cartel in one of those countries is a death sentence. There's a journalism organization based in Central America that has an annual convention. At the end of every convention, they do an in memoriam section, and they want it to be as grisly as possible so people can see. And what it is, it's a slideshow of the journalist's face and then how their body was found. And it's usually a suitcase in the trunk of a car or some ghastly, awful thing. And a lot of those journalists, what has happened is that they like some in Russia who are in the Bay Area now, have had to leave the country. So there is a very large number of journalists in exile. There is a journalist in the Bay Area running one of the best Russian news sites, anti-Putin Russian news sites right now. And so what do we do for journalists in exile who can't go back to their country? Because if they go back, the minute they get off the plane, they're dead.
Look, I think the first thing that we have to do in our kind of news gathering ecosystem is to recognize that while these people are at risk and threatened community, they're also a massive opportunity. They're a resource. They're a resource, for all the reasons that we just talked about that we don't have in a lot of places like Russia, like Iran, like China. And I think it's a cultural shift, in news that we need to intentionally make, that these are people who have lived experience, resources, a knowledge and lay of the land that we don't have, and we can no longer send people to these places. So we kind of need them, right? And I think building that sort of symbiotic relationship and providing resources is a first step. And I'm starting to see it little by little. And a lot of them who come, you talk about a Russian newsroom in San Francisco. There are some in New York, Afghan newsroom in Silver Spring in Maryland, a lot of Iranian exile journalists working in the space. But we have to help them report for our audiences, not just their own diaspora or back into their own countries. I think it's a massive opportunity that is just waiting to be plucked.
Jason's right. I mean, so first thing to say is that exile is becoming much, much more common for journalists. It's the fastest growing area of assistance work that we do is journalists going to exile, whether they're internally displaced, which is what we see in the DRC, or they're being forced into exile, places like Iran. So first of all, we need an enabling environment. We need countries that are willing to take them. Until very recently, the United States was a very popular place and a good place for people to come. That is no longer the case. We've been pushing at the Committee to Protect Journalists for a number of countries to offer schemes where they actually have visas available to journalists, because one of the features of attacks on journalists is it's often quite well telegraphed, but once you know that you're at risk, you need to leave very quickly. And most visa systems are not set up for that. They are not set up for quick moves. They are set up for very lengthy moves, and that's complicated by the fact that many of these journalists, because of the nature of the work that they do, will have criminal records. If you have a criminal record, getting a visa is much more challenging. So there's the getting there in the first place. So we need that willingness from governments. We need to make sure that they can then work when they come here. Many come here and then find that they aren't able to work straight away, so they, don't start off as journalists, to Jason's point, which is why we need newsrooms and others to be supportive. And we also have to recognize that increasingly those journalists, even when they get into exile, are not safe. We know that we see high levels of transnational oppression from Iran. Iran International most recently was threatened with having its premises targeted outside Iran. Russia does it. The Hong Kong government does it. We were just talking earlier with the speaker who's been very supportive in the case of a Hong Kong British national editor and publisher, Jimmy Lai. The arrest of individuals like Jimmy Lai, and again, record numbers of journalists currently in jail worldwide, sends a very strong signal from governments that kind of journalism is unacceptable. So people go into exile, they then get threatened in exile, or worse, their families get threatened. And I know this is a feature, again, of what happens in Iran. Their families get threatened back home. So there needs to be a complex response, but a very forthright response from governments like the United States and others to ensure that those people can continue to report once they're outside.
Traditionally, asylum was an option. It's not an option at this point. Asylum cases aren't going through. Over the last 5 or 6 years, We've worked with dozens of journalists from Iran, Palestinian journalists, Russian journalists, Ukrainian journalists, journalists from Latin America. We've been able to get them in on what we call humanitarian parole, right? But this is not a status that comes with work authorization. It's very complicated. And, Jodi knows this better than anybody. A lot of these people come and have very serious mental health needs as well. So I think it's an America problem that we need to address, and it's an industry-wide problem. But we're not talking about tens of thousands of people, right? It's one that we could come up with the resources to solve. It's just, is there the will to solve it? And I would think that it's in our collective interest to do that.
But yeah, it's a great point that it's more than just getting them to be able to do their jobs, right? These people have families. They have brought them. They need enough money to live in the Bay Area, for instance, right? One of the more expensive places to live. So that type of support, organizations I know have struggled with finding ways to help these journalists so that the support is enough, not only for them, but for their families. I mean, if you talk about business model problems, how does the guy running a Telegram channel in the East Bay in Russia make any money? Like, how is he going to get money to support him, right? So it's almost a total solution we would need in business model, life support. It's everything.
But I think those business models are being developed right now, and the number of people who get their news from non-traditional creator sources is, it's not a secret. It's just on the ascent. And I think it's a problem that we can solve, but I think we have to get creative about it.
If you want to get really depressed, read the Times story today on what Putin is doing. He has cut off Facebook and pretty much all social media. He's built a super app that he wants all of Russia to use, but he's got this problem, and his problem is that people like our friend are using Telegram as a publishing platform. And so the Times did a very long story today about how Putin is trying to just close Telegram. And the importance of this to him is easy to understand when you realize that Russian troops in Ukraine use Telegram to communicate on the battlefield. And he has been told by soldiers that, for the love of God, man, do not stop Telegram. But it is more important for him to block this flow of information than it is for his soldiers to be able to do their jobs, right? And so when you look at, we're not playing a game that has a logical or level playing field. And so that requires a different approach. And so I guess what I'd ask you, Jodi, is, so from your vantage point, and when you're looking for solutions to this, what do you got?
Buckle up. No, I have hope. I have worked in the freedom of expression space now for many years. And one thing I can tell you with absolute certainty is not a single authoritarian regime or individual that wants to suppress a message ever is successful in suppressing the message. You can kill the messenger, you can kill some of the outlets temporarily, but ultimately you don't kill the message. So even if you stop Telegram, something else will replace it. People find ways to do it. In North Korea, I'll always remember this, when I used to run an organization called Index on Censorship, we ran a series about how you got information into North Korea. And people used to put it in lipsticks that they took in, news written and inserted into lipstick so that could then be taken across, and people were reading that. People were throwing little not floppy disks, but little disks kind of over walls. People will find a way. And what I'm really enthusiastic about currently is that despite all of this that we've talked about, despite the record numbers of killings, despite the jailings, despite the huge amounts of online harassment faced by journalists, which we haven't even got onto, the terrible financial model, people are still wanting to be journalists, and they are finding new ways to do that. You know, we talked a lot in journalism about news deserts and the collapse of local news, and yet I meet people every week doing phenomenal journalism at local level here in the United States, really innovative journalism. It doesn't necessarily look like the journalism that we may have grown up with, but it's journalism. And they are doing it in Ukraine. They're finding ways to do it in Iran. They're finding ways to do it in Gaza. So I think we always think there's got to be one solution. You know, if only we could tax the tech companies, or if only we could have this kind of law, that will be the solution. It's never that. It's much more complicated than that. But there's all of these very small, bright spots of resistance, particularly in local media, that I think are the solution to this. What do you do when you have a dictator that wants to control everything? Then you keep finding new ways to get information out. You move out of the country. You find new channels. You develop new software. It will happen, and it is happening.
So Dean Bolden was telling us that, I like calling him Dean Bolden. It's got a nice sound to it. Dean Bolden was telling us earlier today in his office that he's got too many kids who want to be. There's so many kids who want to get into journalism. Hearst has a fellowship program where we take kids out of college and we put them in one of our markets for a year, and then we move them to another market. We have record number of applicants for that program. So, Jason, to review, the hours suck. The pay isn't very good. You can get cut up and wind up in the back of a car. Very, very powerful people want you dead, and they are trying to cut you off at the ankles every chance they get. What are we doing in this profession?
I mean, I asked
Dude, they held
myself
you hostage,
for a
and
long
you didn't
time.
like go into real estate.
And then I came back for more, right? Look, I think, you know, telling stories and telling human stories is at the heart of the human experience, right? This is what we do. And as many obstacles there are to doing this work, and challenges, and the, you know, changing landscape and AI, and we'll look back at this time and there'll be another challenging time that's very different than this one that we can't even imagine, and we'll figure it out. You know, people used to paint pictures on the walls of caves, right?
We used to have print newspapers.
We had print newspapers. And, you know, I think I was telling somebody this just yesterday, you know, I think long form articles, and when I say long form, you know, I'm talking about anything on over 900 words, right? Will probably be like vinyl records pretty soon, but we'll still be telling human stories, right?
But in many ways, the human race has changed the way it communicates, and I always tell people that they're going to be studying this period like we studied the Industrial Revolution, right? This digital revolution changed everything. You know, we don't write letters anymore. We don't really make phone calls, and that has led to a real visual communication approach. My kids send each other posts that include text and video and audio, and it's all mashed together. That has actually made communicating for us more effective as they've tried to cut us off. And so where do you see that going in terms of your typical foreign correspondent? Is it going to be that getting the video is more important than getting the interview?
It seems like it's going in that direction, and I think it kind of depends on where you are and the type of people you're interfacing with. But the facts, whether they are visual or written or spoken word, are the thing that's going to carry the work, and how you deliver them, and how compelling a story you can make around that. And I just don't think that the basic recipe is all that different than it's ever been.
And I think, you know, people will always want things in different ways, right? Some people respond very powerfully to a visual image. We're going to need an awful lot of explanation in the years to come to be able to tell us whether we should trust that image or not because of AI. So even if you do move into a scenario when we're much more used to seeing visual images or having things visually described to us, we're going to need to find many other ways to make sure that we understand whether what we're actually looking at is the Pope in a big puffy jacket or that's AI. And I think you look at I think we're kind of hardwired to often to sort of think that this is the worst moment and nothing. But if you think about But I have long conversations with people about things like, well, is a journalist still a journalist if they're doing things on TikTok, or is a journalist still a journalist if they're doing things on Substack? If you look at you can't make any money out of that. No one wants to look at that, and unless you have a big platform behind you, it's all disastrous. Look at the success of Heather Cox Richardson, right? She's one woman. She's one woman with 3 million followers. And she sits there in her house in Maine. She's got no other infrastructure every night writing what, in my view, is journalism. Fact-based explanations of what's been happening set in a historical context. Now, not everybody wants to read, I don't know how many words she is, but maybe like 600 words every night or every morning. Some people want that in a video format. Some people want it on their way to work in their ear. We're not going to stop needing it in all of those different formats. It's just going to end up the delivery will end up looking slightly different.
I'm old enough to have been in a room at the Post with young people from this company nobody had ever heard of before called Facebook. And we sat in the room with them, and they were talking about their new product. And some very seasoned veteran Post foreign editors and foreign correspondents were in the room, and they were explaining Facebook to them. And very quickly, one of the foreign correspondents sort of raised his hand and said, a foreign leader is going to take your product, and that's going to get people killed one day. And the Facebook people, without batting an eye, said, don't worry, the algorithm will stop it. Never forget this conversation. The algorithm will stop it. You look at Myanmar, you look at some of the other things that were Facebook-led slaughters, right? Governments using it that way. At a time when the world is as divided as the United States is now, in all these different places, right? How do you broach those divisions in a way that humankind comes out the winner at a time when the next new product is coming and they're telling us, don't worry, the algorithms will take care of it. Everything's going to be fine. AI, we got this.
So there's one thing that I've been saying recently that is not music to everybody's ears, but I think as consumers we have to accept some accountability and responsibility for what we consume and what we believe and what we are willing to accept and what we push back on, right? And I don't think we talk about that nearly enough. It's not like we're just a bystander in this whole process. It's the same with our democracy, right? If people don't go out and vote, pretty soon you won't have the option to vote, right? It's not rocket science. And I think it's the same with social media and all the AI slop that's out there. I will ask the current and former lead editors of papers, if people didn't click on Donald Trump stories, we'd publish fewer Donald Trump stories, right? And I'm not saying we don't need to know what the president's doing and not doing, but do we need to know everything that he's doing at all times? And by creating such a massive pulpit and platform where one person dominates all coverage, you're kind of just giving them, you're ceding the conversation to them, right? So I think we have to, in the news industry, but also in the public, accept a little bit of responsibility and kind of start working in the other direction.
We only have a minute left, and before we turn it over to you all for questions, I really want to address an issue that is far, far more important than anything we've talked about, especially for Jason, who grew up in San Rafael, the state of the Golden State Warriors. You have another Warriors fan close by.
I have
The situation is a disaster. In 1 minute,
Look,
how do you fix it, General
I will
Manager?
tell you, first of all, I lived through a lot of very bad Golden State Warriors basketball, much worse than anything that anybody that's under 35 years old would have experienced. I've seen seasons where they didn't win 20 games, so I'm not that worried about it, and I take a lot of joy in the fact that the Warriors won their first championship in Golden State the year before I was born, and they won their second championship the year that I was in prison. And I didn't know, I was very distraught when I found this out. And when I was released, they were in the middle of that. How many games did they win at the start of the season? It's like 20-something that they started on this incredible run. And they've won 3 more championships since I was released. So I'm not so worried about it. I've had a great run. I'm more worried about the fact that my Oakland A's don't exist anymore. And,
I would like to point out that he is the guy who was held hostage in a country and still likes the country. So there is some of that glass half full to you, a little bit of that. So I think we're going to open it up to questions from anybody but Dean Bolden. Please step up if you have any questions.
I was very interested when you were talking about journalism as a mechanism for accountability, and you were talking a little bit about the difficulties in terms of using journalism to get accountability through the courts and some of the work that you're doing to facilitate that. I'd love to hear a little bit more, and whether maybe a little bit comparative analysis of whether it's in the U.S. that it's more difficult or internationally.
So let me start by just saying I'm on a board of an organization called Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. And what that is that's a bunch of lawyers in Washington who are dedicated to exactly that. And I'm happy to report that when I joined the board, we were struggling, didn't have much money. Things were, we were, one lawyer here, one lawyer there. And now with the changes in the country, they are flush with cash and could use more if you're looking for somebody to donate to. But they are positioning lawyers all over the country to help deal with any sort of incursion by elected officials against the press. You saw what happened in, where the hell was that? Oklahoma, where there was the raid of the school, the little newspaper.
Marin County, Kansas.
Right, Marin County, Kansas. That group of lawyers jumped on that and immediately filed against it. You saw what happened with the Pentagon ban. It was that group of lawyers who immediately were activated. It's a great organization, and so there is an army of people prepared to use the courts. The challenge, of course, is that some of the folks in the courts right now may not be as freedom of the press positive as we'd like them to be, but there is a group of lawyers. There is legal help for a lot of journalists around the country who are feeling squeezed or arrested or whatever.
Yeah, and I'll talk about RCFP in a second. On that specific question around documentation, so it's quite technical, but there's things called chains of custody, essentially. So where you hold the material is really important, and then who you pass it to and how it gets passed and where it gets stored and how it gets verified is really important. So by the time that you come to something like the International Criminal Court, for example, or the International Court of Justice, you need to have all of that ready. So if you haven't recorded it in the right way at the beginning, and then you haven't stored it in the right way, and you haven't passed it on in the right way, it can be inadmissible. So there's how you store it. It's, as I say, it's kind of, some of it's slightly boring and technical, is really important. So we are not doing the specific training ourselves. We are running projects to do some of the verification around the killings of journalists so that we eventually potentially can bring our own cases of accountability over the killings of journalists. There are other organizations like the Reckoning Project, which is run by a former journalist, Janine Di Giovanni, which is doing this kind of training for journalists in places like Gaza and Ukraine so that they can make sure that they're doing the documentation to that standard. And as I say, I know a lot of that came out of Eric Stover's work and his team's work here in Berkeley. In the US, in terms of legal support, there's a lot of organizations doing really great work, including RCFP, to provide people with lawyers for defamation cases. The current president likes a defamation case every now and again, but we're seeing that more and more at local level as well, to have those people. And it's really important because if you are a small organization like the Marion County Record, you don't have all of that in-house. You don't have the army of lawyers that, you know, Dean McKay would have had at the New York Times. You need non-profit organizations that can come in. So we're working as part of what we're calling the Journalist Assistance Network with RCFP, with IWMF, with Freedom of the Press Foundation, and with PEN America to make sure that when requests for this kind of support come in, whether it be legal, physical, or trauma, as Jason said, more and more people are requesting trauma support, we can make sure that we direct it to the right organization.
Yeah, I can say even as a regional publisher, the number of legal claims against our work has jumped by a factor of like 20. We often get legal threats when we ask people questions, when we send in questions about an investigation. The first thing that we get back is a letter from the lawyer threatening to sue us. It's become really very common for the rich and powerful to try to use the law against journalists in numerous ways. And I don't know if many of you realize this, but when a big investigation comes out and whoever is the target of the investigation claims that the investigation was fake news, that investigative story was reviewed by any publication by a team of libel lawyers that read every single word. And I mean every single word. Dean can tell you what it's like to go through a legal review with a libel lawyer. Why is that "and" there? And so every single word. So we are very confident that what we publish fits within the guidelines of, and it changes by state, right? Whatever state we're in. And so we're very confident that we are in the right, and yet we'll face the big legal challenges. And if you're a smaller place, they're trying to sue you out of existence. Other questions?
We have one from a virtual audience. What can the public do to promote journalism under the current administration? How do we reach younger generation that depends on social media versus journalism?
Buy a subscription to everything. Seriously, buy a subscription to everything. If you can afford it, you know, don't pick between the Times, the Post, and the Journal and your local paper. Get them all. We all have these great deals. If you pay attention, you should be able to get it for next to nothing. You just have to set reminders for yourself. That's the support we need. We need support with subscriptions, and we're all facing really tough times as we head into AI. In case you haven't noticed, when you do a Google search, it no longer gives you a series of links. It gives you a giant summary. That summary is killing us, because people don't click on the links anymore and they don't go into the stories. So it's a really tough time. So one easy way is to buy a subscription.
I'd say two things. One is, I don't buy this idea that young people are not reading the news. I think we are assuming that because people are not opening print newspapers in the same way. I have 2 teenage kids and they are much better informed than I am, and they get their news from all sorts of different sources. So I don't worry that people are turning off news in that way. I actually think people are really hungry for that information and have got quite wise to how to understand whether it's credible or not. I think the second thing I would say is, I think we've all got to get better. I mean, to Jason's point about some of this is on us, we've got to get better at pushing back. When somebody says to you, oh, I saw that so-and-so did this, or I just read that this happened. Actually asking the question, did it? Where did you read that? How do we know? The number of conversations I have with people who really should know better about things that they think that they, is fact, and who then spread that to other people without anybody saying, hang on a minute, I think that would make a really big difference. And I know I said 2 things. Sorry, I'm going to say a third thing. I think as journalists, we've got to get much better at standing up for each other. I do not understand how you can stand in the White House press pool and let somebody look at another journalist, a female journalist, and call them piggy to their face and say absolutely nothing.
And one thing we talked about beforehand is the importance of us delivering a message that journalism is not partisan. The pursuit of the truth is not for Democrats or for Republicans. It's for all of us, for all of society. My old boss, Marty Barron, does a great speech on how can a society function if we no longer agree on what's true. And we must be able to agree on what's true regardless of what political party you're in or whatever your beliefs are.
Hello, hi. I'm asking this question as a former reporter who's worked for the Mercury News and the LA Times and also in Asia. In light of the huge staffing cuts at the Washington Post and other media outlets, how can true nonpartisan, hard-hitting, quality journalism and journalists be protected from owners whose priorities may not be, or they may not prioritize journalism principles and ethics?
I mean, I don't know that we can be, per se, but the reality that I can tell you at the Washington Post is, we're dealing with major obstacles. I would say that we're down half of our staff, and it's making it very difficult to cover the things that we traditionally have been able to dive deeper into than anyone else. That being said, there's nobody telling us not to cover specific issues or cover them from a specific direction. Emilio worked at the Post for a long time. I don't think there was ever a case of the ownership trying to dictate what we did and didn't do, and I don't know of any that have happened in recent times. But it does certainly feel like there is a big mountain in front of us that wasn't there before, and how we surmount that and get back to the kind of fulsome coverage that the Washington Post has been known for so long is going to be a challenge.
I'm also, as you know, quite confident in the singular belief that nobody tells a journalist what to do. Are you fucking crazy? Jeff Bezos is going to come to the Post newsroom. He's going to gather 100 journalists, and he's going to tell them what to cover. First thing they're going to do is they're going to write that story. I mean, they're writing that story tomorrow. The next thing they're going to do is tell them to go pound sand, and if you want to fire me, go ahead and try. I mean, I can't get journalists to do like normal stories I want them to do. How are you going to get an entire room of people to suddenly bend to the wind? I mean, I'd love to see what's going to happen at CBS right now with its new leadership. It does not seem to be going well, right? From inside, they are leaking everything that woman does. It is becoming public, right or wrong. I don't have a real opinion on this. And so course correcting a newsroom even a little bit is really difficult. Getting them to fall under the sway of some evil, rich billionaire who's, oh, God, no. I personally can't imagine. Worked for Jeff for 9 years at the Post. Never saw anything from him. I had him pre the new girlfriend, though, so I don't know how now wife. I don't know what happened there. We love Mackenzie. We really love Mackenzie. And had he just stayed with Mackenzie, maybe things would have been different. But anyway.
I don't think that can be the solution, though. I don't think being in control of people's marital affairs is the way that we're going to solve.
It all would have been different.
But I think I would say, though, I think there are ways and means, right? If you think about something like this, the Guardian, which has a trust model, what is run by something called the Scott Trust, which essentially takes it out of the control of one individual, ways that you can kind of try and protect organizations. I think the much greater worry actually isn't so much that I think we've always had news outlets that slant in a particular direction, whether that's coming down from the owner or whatever. I think the much greater worry is what do you do when you have significant media capture in a country? So when you start to have the government also create the conditions that favor a particular kind of ownership. And I think you need to be very careful in the United States because we see all of the hallmarks of what we saw in places like Hungary coming here, where you see how politicized, and he's very open about it, the chairman of the FCC, of the regulator, is about wanting to control who owns what kind of media, that you have to be very, very alive to, because that's when the ownership question becomes much more insidious.
Yes. Could you state your name, please, and where you're from?
I was just going to say something for the Warriors, but that's okay. I won't. I just want to say this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. It's just been so great. And thank you, Dean, for bringing us here. And I just want to say Herb Caen was a great guy, in case you're wondering why. In any case, so I do want to say this about information and the government and all that, because we are having big fights about intelligence now and the FISA program and all that. This is going to sound very self-serving, so I'll put up the self-serving sign. About 20 years, when President Bush was president, and my goodness, what a breath of fresh air compared to what we have now. But at that time, and I'm not talking partisanship here. We were divided, some Democrats, some Republicans on this subject. And this exists now too. When reporters use information that the government thinks is a leak, and then they go after people, and I know I've had to not talk to press because I know exactly what the story is, and they'll say, well, is this true? Is that true? I say, I really just can't confirm or deny. But here's one thing that I did do, and that is, at the time of 9/11 and then Iraq, Afghanistan, all that, there was a leak that happened, and Dick Cheney was just pounding away. We're going to find this leaker. We found this leaker. But it turned out to be a Republican senator who was the leaker. But that's not the point. The point is, as far as reporters are concerned, there were those Democrats and Republicans who were proposing in the intelligence bill that if a reporter used any intelligence, he or she would have to prove that it was not harmful to our national security. So I said, I'm not voting for this bill. I was the top Democrat. I'm not voting for this bill. This is absolutely wrong. We can't do this. I took it to President Clinton. No, it wasn't Bush yet. Clinton was just president, but it was that, so we say, enthusiasm coming in. I took it to Clinton. I said, you can't sign this intelligence bill because of what it does. We then, because they are not going to pass a bill now because I'm not going to be for it and the president's not going to sign it. So we changed it to say that if a reporter uses information that the government wants to question, the government has to prove that it harmed national security. This was a big deal. Editorial boards around the country were supporting what we did in this or that, but then we try to keep it low-key so that it didn't become a target itself. But for changing the burden of proof. And that's kind of the stuff that we're going to have to doing more of as they go now. They're doing FISA. I've always supported the FISA. It's a borderline thing. But they've taken out all some of the protections that we put in there. And again, if you use that information, the burden has to be on the government to prove that. But we have to make sure that, again, it's about legislation and litigation and communication. I'll just close by saying this. I'm a newspaper reader. Paul reads everything online. I like to see the newspaper. I want to see where it is and all the rest. So a couple of weeks ago, I was on a plane. I had them all. I had the pink. I got I had all. And one of the flight attendants came by and said, "Oh my God, I haven't seen anything like this in 20 years." I said, "What are you talking about?" "A person reading the newspaper on the plane." And I said, "No, that can't be true. I've been on this plane before." But we did have sort of a collective idea of what was true. Whether you agreed with the approach or not, the difference of opinion was not about truth. It was about something else. But now we don't even have. That's harder to prove. But anyway, thank you again.
Thank you.
This has been wonderful.
I do have 8 of them on my iPad.
But let me just say this one thing about this thing you brought up. When we did, it's about refugees and that whole program. When we did, the asylum, when we did, I don't use this name, but when he did the Muslim ban, we had enormous, we weren't in majority, but we had an enormous mock hearing on it. Everybody came, hundreds of people from the State Department, from the military and everything. This is so wrong, it's so wrong, it's so wrong. But why I bring it up is the evangelicals, the Evangelical Association of America, whatever they are, they're right-wingers, not the liberal evangelicals, such as they are, came and they said, the asylum program is the crown jewel of American humanitarianism. These are the right-wingers. So there is some hope in the fact that there is some value system that people do respect. But we took our numbers all the way down under the sky in terms of asylum, and that's really a big problem. And in the past, we have criticized other nations for not allowing people in on asylum. So, but again, thank you all so much.
And by the way, when you hear that a publisher has somehow done something to threaten national security, most people don't realize, but there are communications between editor-in-chiefs and high-level people at the Pentagon that go on all the time. And we know when we're going to write something that could put troops in harm's way, and every single time we don't run the story. So this notion that we are in black boxes and have no idea if our work is going to lead to somebody being hurt. I wonder how many conversations like this Dean has had when he was running the New York Times, right? We know we're not going to get anybody killed. They will call. We get calls from all kinds of people. We'll take the call from the Pentagon that wants us to be careful about what we're reporting, and we are careful. All right. I just got the end sign back there, which thank you all very much. You've been terrific.
Thank you.
For coming out on a rainy night, which is like a miracle. Thank you so much.